Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome again to Finding Me in the ITV Networks. Today with a very special guest, and this is Professor Maldonado Torres. Professor is an associate professor in the Department of Latino and Caribbean Studies at Rutgers University. He was a president initially, or he presided over the Caribbean Philosophical Association from 2008 to 2013, and is intrinsically involved and deals a lot with the work of Frantz Fanon. And as we have raised in previous discussions, the importance of Frantz Fanon to Africa and especially to the South African situation, and for the audience in particular to Islam and to Muslims as well. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for being here, Professor, and for sharing your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And I think we need to thank UNISA as well for affording us this opportunity and for carrying forward this summer school on decolonial studies. Professor, I'm very interested because you focus a lot on the decolonial turn, understanding what it means, etc., and unpacking this concept. So for the benefit of my viewers, what do you mean when you speak about the decolonial turn?
The decolonial turn is a complex concept, and it means several things at the same time. So it means, for example, on the one hand, a turn in the attitude of a subject, a shift from seeing Western modernity and modern Western civilization as the goal, as an aspiration, as an ideal, from that to seeing it as a problem. So it is a shift that problematizes modernity instead of idealizes it. And problematizes it in the sense that it sees that modernity, one of the things that it has done is to breed coloniality, to promote, to spread colonialism, and along with it, slavery, racism, various forms of discrimination. These things are not purely pre-modern or anti-modern. They have been part and parcel of the modern project. So the colonial turn, first meaning perhaps is the shift, a turn away from a more modernizing attitude to a decolonial one, to one that raises the question about modernity as a problem. Right? And another one at the philosophical level, it sort of enters in dialogue with the formulation or proposal of various turns in philosophy, but in Western philosophy. So in Western philosophy, you find, for those of in the audience who are into philosophy, the linguistic turn, the pragmatic turn, different kinds of turns that indicate sort of not different schools, but different ways of philosophizing. Right? So partly with the idea of the decolonial turn, what it means is that to think about decolonization, for example, to take this attitude that I talked about before and begin to think and interrogate the world and interrogate modernity and interrogate ourselves, that this is not purely, let's say, a political issue or a political project. This is also an intellectual and a philosophical project, or a project with philosophical dimensions, intellectual dimensions that we need to explore as serious as Western philosophers have explored their own respective turns. So in a way, it's putting in some conversation with that kind of current without reducing it to simply yet another Western turn.
Okay, so you're not presenting an alternate narrative. Are you presenting a parallel narrative, an alternative, or you're questioning the existing narrative?
Is all of those combined.
Okay.
It aims to do all of those, because in fact, one needs decolonization, I think, in fact, is about multiple strategies that you are work sometimes from within and against, and sometimes you build some parallel building, but the existing building or structure, you also try to change it and hopefully make it into a better one, and maybe one day you will then move to the other one.
Okay, so you can incorporate what exists. you can incorporate the goodness of what exists.
Of what exists, yes, always. The thing is that in order to determine what is good, right, you have to, the criteria to identify what is good and what is not have to be new.
Okay. So you examine with new tools. In other words, you begin with clean tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the question that I think many people struggle with, especially if you look at in terms of the these so-called jihadi groups or whatever, or the Orient, the discussion of the Orient that comes from the West, is that Islam is against modernity, Islam is against modernization, Islam is against advancement, against technology. So if you are decolonial, are you against technological advancement, against modernizing? I mean, like, you know, these are questions that people somehow have difficulty in reconciling.
And actually, this is one of the reasons, if you will, why someone like Frantz Fanon is so vital and so important, I think. Because he actually wrote about this. He wrote about this more than 50 years ago. Right? Because he was involved in the Algerian Liberation Front.
Right.
And so he explored the extent, you know, what is happening with Algeria for him, you know, with, let's say, Muslim Algeria particularly. Not only he recognized that Algeria was also a diverse society, but what is happening, or what is the relationship between, let's say, the Algerian subject or an Algerian Muslim subject and France, that was the colonizer. Not even, you know, even, yes, Western modernity, yes, the West, and even France and French thought and French ideas and French technologies. Does it mean that if I want decolonization, I have to avoid touching, connecting, using anything that comes from France? Like, for example, the radio as a technology, for example, Western medicine, right? And he wrote explicitly about these things. And his position was that no, it is not like that. And it is not like that because, to begin with, many of these technologies that seemingly we have received from the West have sometimes appeared before in non-Western countries, or they have been created using knowledges from non-Western countries. So why should the West then put something together and get to have the monopoly of that?
Right.
So it is not, we are leaving it too much to the West that. And second, really the most important thing for Fanon is not so much the technology itself, but how it is used, what purpose it serves. And so he writes about how Algerian revolutionaries then used the radio for their own means, not simply to spread French propaganda about French superiority because it has something like the radio or technology and so on, but they use it to communicate messages from village to village, sometimes hidden, sometimes explicit, and so on. The same with Western medicine, and that didn't mean that there was a rejection of another form of local view of health or medicine. But actually that revolutionary subject is involved in multiple acts of creation, appropriation, recreation. All of that is part of what is to breathe in this new era of non-colonial relations, right, of the colonial effort. So in that sense, decoloniality is about that rich effort of trying to create another reality, but it's not simply by reacting by a reaction, purely reactionary spirit. Action involves multiple acts, and you can take tools from many parts, many sides. And just like that, it doesn't mean that, for example, it doesn't mean that you cannot take anything from the West or Western and so on. And it doesn't mean also that then you have to affirm everything that is presumably your side, whether this is Algeria or the Muslim world and so on.
So you need to question from both sides.
Exactly.
Okay, and it's internal and an external questioning, right? So I like what Professor Ramon said the other day. He said that it is also a form of a jihad, an internal and an external jihad, the whole decolonial struggle. Okay, but now you have written a book. This was your first book, and it's Against Wars, Views from the Underside of Modernity. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Yes. Against War, actually, it relates to the decolonial turn in a way.
Okay.
Right? What I said that the decolonial turn is about raising the question of modernity as a problem, seeing modernity as problematic, as producing problems to which we need to find real solutions. And once you begin to approach modernity as a problem, then the question is, what kind of problem is it? How problematic is it? How do we see it? How exactly? What is it? And what I formally argue against war is that, in a way, Western modernity has structured itself as a paradigm of war, or as a warring paradigm. That's why it doesn't matter that it embraces the rhetoric of advancement, of peace, of justice, of righteousness, and so on. It doesn't matter what the rhetoric is. Ultimately, right, it has been intimately connected with projects of expansion, annihilation, massacres, violence. So because violence is in the very, let's say, in the very basis of what Western modernity is. So I try to offer an analysis of that, partly through three figures. One of them is Fanon, and another is a Mexican-Argentinian philosopher who actually was a lecturer last week here in the school. Enrique Dussel is a Latin American philosopher who has written over 60 books. Right? He's the most prolific philosopher from Latin America that has ever lived. And he's still with us, sharing knowledge and producing new thought.
Yeah,
he's amazing.
He is amazing.
So I consider him. I use his work as a lens to do this. And the third figure is Emmanuel Levinas, who is a French Jewish thinker, who also, I think, contributed to this out of the experience of the Holocaust, of the Jewish Holocaust. But in a way, Levinas, he's in a way his own Eurocentrism and Jewish centrism limited the radicality of some of his findings. Okay. Right. So I use Fanon and Dussel in a way to further expand those ideas.
So before you go further, I just want to interrupt you here, because some people will say that by you using Levinas, that puts a question because he's situated in the global north, right? So can you use a scholar from the global north, an academic from the global north? Can he be a decolonial scholar, and can he contribute to the decolonial project?
Yes. Exactly. Being a decolonial thinker and contributing to the decolonial thought are two different things.
Okay.
Right. So I think that there are a wide number of thinkers, I think, from the West that accidentally, even sometimes, they can offer something, they can contribute to it, yes.
Okay.
Because when you produce thinking, thinking involves multiple ideas and new questions. For example, you can come up with a question.
Right.
The question could be very important, but that doesn't mean that you have to follow the answer given to it. So you can actually take the question, recognize the contribution of a certain thinker to the question, and then you not only simply take the question for granted, reformulate the question even, and then look for other answers. And when you look for answers and reformulate the question, your interlocutors and sources are not simply European, are already, are from various places. So that's a decolonial way of thinking, right? So in that way, you can also approach Levinas, understand the sort of certain revolutionary aspects of his thinking, but also identify its limits. Take some ideas of his thinking, reinterpret them, and then relocate it with other figures that are more centrally working through decolonization and part of the decolonial turn.
Okay, so we're at a break. When we come back, I want to raise this question of decolonial thought. We'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me today in the ITV networks here at the UNISA grounds with Professor Maldonado Torres, and we're speaking about decoloniality and decolonialism, incorporating that into the thought of Frantz Fanon. And before we went into the break, Maldonado was explaining to us the difference between decolonial thinking and decolonial thought. And so you explained much of the question. And I just want to ask you, if we look at, for example, Hannah Arendt on violence, you can look at her thoughts on violence, and she's Eurocentric, center it there, but you can take those thoughts and then recognize the value of those questions that she raises and then interpret it or do a decolonial thinking of those ideas, isn't it? Because when she looks, her gaze is on the north. She doesn't recognize the violence done to the colonial subject, but recognizes only the violence done to the European subject or the Jewish subject in terms of the Holocaust. So it's about reinterpreting those thoughts.
Yes, you can. I mean, you have to be, of course, selective. There has to be various reasons why you're taking some idea or engaging some author.
Right.
It's not that like now the project is about engaging only European authors, seeking for how useful they are or not. No, there can be projects for which I am not engaging any European author. Not because in principle I don't want to engage them, but because I find that other non-European authors actually engage that more seriously or more provocatively. So the Europeans don't have necessarily out of principle to show up everywhere and so on. But at the same time, I'm not going to limit the possibilities of thinking. So if Hannah Arendt or Levinas or Marx or Horkheimer or Adorno or Derrida will appear useful in some way,
use them.
Then I could do that.
Yes. Right. So the whole idea of the decolonial thought is first to experiment from within, isn't it? And from our own scholars. Now, speaking about your book, Against War, so you speak of this paradigm of war that is intrinsically built into the colonial system. So why do you say you're against war? Because Fanon, when he speaks about colonial violence, he says sometimes it is necessary to respond with violence because there is no other alternative.
Exactly. Yes, because how I'm talking about war fundamentally is about first as a paradigm, and second as an always unfinished project of war, right? That always needs to be war, where war is always in the horizon. Right? And Fanon did say, because we are under this war that breeds colonialism and expansion all of the time, we need to respond to that war ultimately, if there are no other means, by forms of violence. But what he's trying to create with that is not a paradigm of war. He's trying to escape the paradigm of war.
So it's not the first choice.
It's not the first choice, one. And second, even when it is, and you engage in war activity or violent revolutionary activity, the goal, the telos, the end of it is precisely to really escape not only a particular war, but the paradigm of war altogether.
So in creating your new society, you're creating a society that is free of this concept of violence.
That is, yes, that escapes the paradigm of war, and that means ultimately that you have to create new institutions, new ideas of the human being, right? New, nation states, maybe another kind of structure of authority that will be different from the nation state, and so on. And that's why, for example, Fanon called not simply for Algerian independence, but actually for a new kind of Algerian society and structure of power that will give more centrality, for example, to the peasants in Algeria and so on, more decentralized, but also to a more kind of African politics of solidarity between southern parts, sub-Saharan, North Saharan parts of Africa and so on. Because what you're trying to create is another kind of system, but internally, from the subject to society to whatever, the group of societies in what is known as the nation states, to also the continent and beyond. And that is a post-warring reality, post-war reality.
So you're engaging with the other subjects, or engaging with those whom themselves are experiencing this element of war.
Yes, you try. I mean, in the war against war, you build relations with anyone who is opposing the war.
Right. Some alliances.
Yes, and that could be, again, people that you consider like yourself or classified as people of the same race or gender, but it could be also with others. Fanon, for example, wrote about the participation of Jews and also of European in the Algerian Liberation Front. Right?
Oh, interesting.
And he said there's no question. I mean, really, for him, the litmus test was not so much who you are, but what are you willing to do?
So it doesn't matter the color of your skin?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Ultimately. Of course, people will find there will be different ways of supporting that struggle, of participating, But the question of in or out is not defined solely or merely by race or religion or color or anything, or gender or anything like that. So for him, because in part the revolutionary struggle is about creating a new society, a new sense, of new people. And that is, in all its richness, also a diversity of peoples. So what you want to create is a new society where Jews, Muslims, Christians, and so on, different people can begin to relate to each other very different than they have done so far. So you can, so the new society is not simply a monolithic society that you're aspiring to.
Right.
Yes, you could ask for particular resources and spaces to enrich, to focus on particular group formations. But the large social sphere is going to be diverse. Now, that you have diversity doesn't mean that you're going to be killing each other, right? This would transit from one to the other. That's what Fanon said. It doesn't go. We need to create a new structure and a new sense of subjectivity that can actually live with others, not simply in peace, but enriching ourselves through connections.
Okay, so I know you've done a lot of research on Professor Dussell's work, and Professor Dussell speaks a lot about politics, political arrangement, etc. Now, through your meditations, your Fanonian meditations, and reading the work of Professor Dussell, is there a way of organizing the political society in a structure that is alternate to the nation state? Are we stuck in that paradigm?
It is definitely one of the main challenges and issues that we have, right? Do we need the nation state? Do we try to acquire power within the nation state? Do we try to create organizations outside of the nation state? And if so, what organizations? I think that this, should not be decided probably as a matter of principle, but that in a way we should be doing probably and experimenting with all of those. So probably we need the struggles within the nation state through the political party system and so-called democracy and try to change. But that doesn't mean that you are thinking that will be the solution. But to the extent that it is there, I want whatever is there not to work better on the one hand, and second, to also allow a space for other political, socio-political formations to exist. So if I want better chance of alternative socio-political organizations to exist, I want a less violent state next door.
Right.
So I may have to intervene in the state and its institutions, including the university, including the legal system. We're not simply going to leave all of that to the most Eurocentric forms because we think that the state cannot be fundamentally and ultimately completely redeemed. No, but it can be a difference if we have a very savage, brutal, explicit.
Of course.
Yeah, like the police.
But there's no opportunity for.
And you have, exactly. But also you can then build different things. For example, the Zapatistas in Mexico, they have their own autonomous communities, indigenous communities that, were pushed from the boundaries of metropolis in Latin America and elsewhere. And they have used that space to build their own forms of sociality and political organization to some extent independent from the state, because the state organism doesn't reach there. And that's something to recognize. The state is fundamentally sometimes more an idea than a reality. That is, it's an idea of regulation of groups of people, but it cannot always reach out to all the spaces in a given land or a given right, cannot always legislate everything. And in some cases, actually, you don't find complete states form. So that has left the space for other experimentations. Now, we are the ones. So I think that those other social political organizations have existed all throughout. Yes. And we have to make the work as artists, intellectuals, people in media and so on, of beginning to look at them really seriously.
And so we're at the end, and I'd like you to give us a parting thought.
As you know, I've been participating in the summer school in Decolonial Studies in UNISA for the last 3 years. It was very exciting last year to see Roads Must Fall emerge and Fees Must Fall, and actually see that also the discourse on decolonization beginning to strike a chord in an even more profound way. So now I am here in the process of the struggle. So I look forward to see what South African people and South African youth and workers particularly, how they are going to advance their own thinking. And I will be writing and thinking about that for the next 2 months and a half. So it will be, I'm just looking forward to it all.
Thank you very much. We're going to come back in another interview. We'll talk about the decolonial struggle in terms of the institutions. But for now, I'd like to say thank you for sharing your time. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.